Good morning, everyone, and thank you to those joining us here today at California State Capitol in support of Senate Bill 300, a modest reform to an extreme injustice. SB 300 will be heard in the Assembly Public Safety Committee this morning at 9 a.m. We'd like to thank all of our sponsors of SB 300, including those that joined us here today: the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, the California Coalition for Women Prisoners, Californians United for a Responsible Budget, the Drop LWOP Coalition, the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, Families United to End LWOP, the Felony Murder Elimination Project, Silicon Valley Debug, and the Young Women's Freedom Center. Our first speaker at today's news conference is the author of SB 300, Senator Dave Cortese.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you everyone who's been advocating and who's been in support of this legislation. It has been a challenging process, but a rewarding one at the same time. And I think sometimes the more we talk about this bill, the more complicated it becomes for people, and it's really a very simple proposition. No one should be sentenced to death or to die behind prison walls due to the actions of another. But for many Californians, this is exactly their reality. Without intention, without brandishing a weapon, without firing a shot, people are charged with murder and sentenced to die in our state prisons for a crime that they did not actually commit. Those who didn't kill anyone nor intend for anyone else to die. SB 300 will right this wrong through a common sense, modest reform. SB 300 restores judicial discretion to judges, allowing them to order a sentence other than the death penalty or life in prison without parole for felony murder special circumstances cases in which a person did not kill anyone nor intend for anyone to die. That is a simple proposition. In many of these cases, as you'll hear firsthand today, it's victims of abuse being charged for their abuser's criminality. Or it's those that meant no harm, but were simply present during a death they did not cause. When statutes such as this are largely done away with in other states, most other countries, and most parts of the world, it begs the question of who these laws are really impacting or targeting here in California. The reality is we know these laws are impacting life in prison without the possibility of parole for a crime you did not commit or intend to commit is a sentence no one deserves. But it is one being disproportionately served to Black and Latinx communities in California, particularly our young people as well as women who are more likely to be criminalized due to the actions of their abusers. The felony murder special circumstances rule represents all that is wrong in our criminal justice system today, and I urge my colleagues to end these unjust sentencing schemes once and for all. Again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Senator Cortese. Next, we will hear from SB 300 advocate Lynn Williams.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to allow me to speak on behalf of SB 300 and sentence reform in California. On May 13, 1989, our family was forever changed. My sister died when her car was hit and struck by a person trying to evade the police. We were consumed by sorrow, but never by revenge or anger. Elaine would not have liked that. She was a very spiritual person and dedicated to justice and fairness and understanding. So I speak today as her voice to support SB 300, which would give or allow the justice or the judge in the situation to make a determination of the sentencing of 25 years to life or life without parole. When the DA asked about the death penalty in 1989, our family resoundingly answered no. We believe in the sanctity of life and that a person can change. When the DA then talked to me 31 years later, it was the very first time I ever heard the sentence that the perpetrator was given. I heard terms like felony murder with special circumstances, mandatory life without parole, or LWOP. These were all new to me. I'd never heard these terms before, and I had never heard or put a person to the sentencing. I never knew what had happened to the person who had been incarcerated for, in our mind, accidentally killing my sister. He had no intent to kill her. These terms were very concerning and seemed to be an overreach of the law. In our case, the person did not intend to kill my sister. Yes, he should be punished justly for the criminal behavior he demonstrated, but he did not murder my sister. Elaine would never have supported his virtual death sentence of life without parole, and the sentence did nothing to help our healing. While victims' families are diverse, many share my perspective. And so in closing, I beseech you, let the punishment fit the crime. Let our democracy truly support restorative justice and restoration and rehabilitation. And may we be guided by the wisdom, there is no justice without mercy. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, for sharing your story. Now I will turn to SB 300 advocate Jamil Williams.
I just want to start off by saying thank you, Lynn, for your testimony today. Good morning. My name is Jamil Wilson. I'm a proud husband, a son, a staff father, and an active member of my community. I am currently the Deputy Director of Guest Services with an organization named Five Keys that was co-founded by the San Francisco Sheriff's Department. We help those that are currently unhoused to get immediate shelter and provide services that ultimately lead to permanent homes. Now that you know a little bit about me and what I do to give back to our community, I would also like to share something else about me. In 1994, I, along with 3 other co-defendants, was arrested and charged under the felony murder rule, facing life without parole. Now, I will never forget the day I received my sentence. In the courtroom that day, the judge said he wished he could give me a lesser sentence after hearing all the facts of my case. With remorse and deep regret in my soul that I still carry with me today, the judge, being bound by existing law, he could only sentence me to life without parole. Now I want to make it very clear. I truly regret what happened earlier in my life, but my role in the events were extremely limited. I knew that, the judge knew that, but I was still sentenced to die in prison. I'm here today with Families United to End Life Without Parole, and I'm in strong support of SB 300. SB 300 will simply allow judges, like the one I had, to hear the facts of a case and to impose a parole-eligible sentence of 25 years to life, rather than the death penalty or life without parole. And the only way I'm here today and making a difference in my community is because of a commutation after serving 26 years of incarceration. And I'm proud to be one of 170 plus people in California who have been commuted after receiving an LWOP sentence. And before rejoining society and living fulfilling lives and making amends for the harm they have done, many of these people served 25, 35, even 45 years in prison. But it could have been for the rest of their lives. I urge the California legislature to pass SB 300. This common sense, modest reform will reduce extreme sentencing while keeping people accountable for their actions in California's legal system. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Jamil. Next, we will hear from Yolanda of Silicon Valley Debug.
Good morning. My name is Yoli, and I'm an organizer with Silicon Valley Debug. Through our community organizing work in the court system, we support families across the state who have loved ones incarcerated or facing possible incarceration. I am also a loved one of someone who is currently in prison. He had just turned 18 years old when arrested and was later sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. For the past 17 years, I have been serving this time up right alongside him. SB 300 does not apply to cases like his, as he was not convicted of felony murder special circumstance. But I know the feeling of hopelessness and despair from a life without parole sentence. And we know families who are grappling not only with the incarceration of their loved one, but the pain and injustice of their loved one being sentenced to die in prison. At first, I got involved with this work I do because of my loved one. However, it was through this work I realized how many more families were impacted as well. Seeing the devastation in the wake of life without parole, we must act to prevent future families from carrying this pain. I believe in redemption for every person. We have to allow a pathway for people to earn their way back to freedom. We are all impacted by life without parole. The communities who are left behind, the victims and crime survivors, the people who cause harm, and the families. Everyone is harmed, and we should come together as a community to take the urgent steps needed to end this grave injustice within our current legal system. I strongly support SB 300. This bill is essential because though it is modest in scope, for those doing LWOP and their loved ones, it is the most meaningful legislation thus far. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoli. Our last speaker today is Dr. Lisa Biaria, professor in the Department of Gender Studies at UCLA.
Good morning. My name is Elisa Biaria, and I'm a gender studies professor at UCLA and an anti-violence advocate. I'm also a co-founder of Survived and Punished, a national organization that works to end the criminalization of survivors of domestic and sexual violence. I'm here today because, remarkably, California's sentencing laws allow courts to prosecute people for murder even if they did not kill anyone. When I first learned about these laws, I was alarmed that criminal punishment in California had become so extreme, so pro-disposability, that people were being sent to prison forever, no possibility of parole, because of a tragic act of violence enacted by an entirely different person. I've been an advocate for victims of domestic and sexual violence for 25 years. And here's what I know to be true. If you have a law that punishes people for something that someone else did, that law will disproportionately impact victims of domestic violence and sex trafficking, because those victims often cannot extract themselves away from abusive individuals. Coercion, terror, and chaos puts victims in violent situations not of their making. Tammy Cooper is a black woman who was trying to survive domestic violence and sex trafficking. Her abuser and trafficker tragically killed another person. Tammy wasn't even in the room when it happened. Under threat of violence, she was told by her abuser to take the person's wallet after he had been killed. Tammy was prosecuted as an accomplice, and because of the felony murder rule, she was held responsible for the violent actions of her abuser. She was sentenced to life without parole. She was punished for being a victim, and her punishment was permanent imprisonment. That's madness. Unfortunately, Tammy's case is not unique. Courts systematically punish victims of domestic and sexual violence, and black women are, unsurprisingly, particularly vulnerable to this form of state punishment. Why is the answer to the tragic loss of life destroying as many other lives as possible? I call on legislators to reject bad faith justifications of these laws, see them for what they are, then listen to the people who these laws have impacted, Listen to the devastation that these laws have caused to people who have been abandoned to prison for the rest of their lives. Listen to survivors of violence like Tammy, who was in prison for 28 years. Listen to their families and then take action. I support SB 300 as a victim advocate. I stand with the statewide Domestic Violence Coalition and many other victim advocates across the state who also support SB 300. I call on legislators to please pass SB 300. It's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers, to Senator Cortese, and all of the advocates supporting the passage of SB 300. And let's get to committee.